Hi, and welcome to the Community Advocate Podcast. Today we're catching up with Sahba Hamid, Community Relations Manager with Settlement Services International, who played a pivotal role in helping migrant communities and refugee communities navigate the recent devastating floods caused by Cyclone Alfred in Queensland. Welcome, Sahba.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Thanks for taking the time. Firstly, tell us a little bit about your role at Settlement Services International, or SSI. How long have you been with the organisation?
Sure. So my role at Settlement Services International is as a community relations manager, and I've been here for about 7 years in different roles, but I've been in this role for since 2021, and my role is to work with communities from multicultural backgrounds at all different levels of the settlement journey. Some have been newly arrived, and some have been here for quite a while. So it's about supporting them and accessing any supports in the community, and have access to advocacy and anything, but also making sure that any support they need in terms of having an organized system for themselves. That's something that we can definitely work with them, or response to natural disaster. So it's a very diverse role. There's a lot of things that we support communities with.
And you're based in Queensland, yeah?
Yes, we are based in Queensland. Yeah.
Whereabouts are you located in Queensland?
We are in Logan, but we have offices in Logan and Zelmia, and the projects that we run are from a whole range of regions. So we also have offices in Goodna and some other regions. So in Kingston, but my projects are in covers a lot of Southeast Queensland. So Moreton Bay South, Brisbane, Logan, Ipswich, and Redlands.
It's a big state, Queensland. Yeah, my wife's a Queenslander, so I know, bigger than Victoria, where I'm based. What sort of challenges do migrant and refugee communities face when they're caught up in natural disasters like the recent floods? Obviously, it was a huge event. It was the whole country was watching the Queenslanders deal with it. But what are some of the particular things in the communities that you work with that makes it particularly hard when something like that happens?
Yeah, there's multiple challenges that communities face, and I think that makes it very complex as well, because there's not just one challenge. Language is one of the biggest barrier that our communities face, and not just language, but digital literacy can be very big challenge and barrier for them. A lot of times we see that information is in English, but then there are other times that there are information that's translated, but because they're online, that becomes a bit of a challenge for them to access. There are other challenges like fear of authorities. In Australia, a lot of the recovery work, or even the disaster preparedness work and supports happen by people like from QPS and disaster recovery, the different support institutions and those places. Unfortunately, a lot of our communities have come from an experience where the authorities persecuted them. So for them, it's a big challenge. Even hearing there's that fear to engage with them. So that's another big challenge, and also the trust. So that kind of leads to a mistrust of authorities, but also other issues around transport. Like I was noticing to go and get sandbags. They needed transport, but they didn't necessarily have access to them. Transport and going to get sandbags on a public transport is very difficult. So isolation is and mental health is one of the major challenge. So a lot of these traumas, it could trigger their traumas when news such as cyclone and possible devastation, and then aftermath and the recovery stage, the challenges that they face could trigger their trauma. So that's massive challenge. And there's heaps of others. But these are kind of the key ones that we found with multicultural communities.
And that makes it even harder, because obviously a lot of that's on top of what other members of the community would be going through if they're caught up in that sort of situation. So it's actually even compounding it. What I'm saying is it'd be hard enough, but let alone all these extra things like, mistrust of authorities because of their personal experience and that kind of thing. What's the diversity of the communities that you are dealing with? Obviously, they're from all over the world, but it's quite a lot in this particular area. Like there's a lot of different language groups, I assume, and what are some of the communities that are present?
Yeah, Logan itself is very diverse. In saying that, Queensland in general, we have, like in Brisbane, there's a lot of multicultural communities. Ipswich is a new settlement area, so very diverse. Logan itself has communities from different backgrounds, and then they're new and emerging, like our communities from African background, Myanmar, Afghanistan, and so many others, Rohingya, but also we have the established communities, such as Indians, and some of the African communities might be established. Even some of the Afghan communities might be established, but we have the Khmer community. So it's a very, very diverse. I believe it's 234 different community nationalities that are here, or ethnic backgrounds that are in Logan. But in saying that, every local area is so different. Brisbane is also very diverse itself. A lot of Filipino, Chinese, and Indian communities, as well as Syrian, Iraqi, and different Middle Eastern countries. So yeah, very diverse, the areas that we work in.
Does that make it difficult to have a consistent approach? I mean, you're trying to do, I assume, certain core things, but the diversity in language for a start, if for those that don't speak a lot of English, like, is that tricky? I mean, because obviously you've got one person in your team that speaks all those different languages. Like, is that a particular pain point in trying to help people, like a frustration for them and you?
Yeah, it can be challenging, but we have our ways of working with the community leaders. So when we engage community leaders, we found that they're amazing, they're so proactive, and most of the time they're the ones who approach us, and when that's an amazing time for them to connect with each other and learn from each other around what are the other communities do to support. So there's so much strength in our multicultural communities, and in times of crisis, it just comes out so naturally. And I really want to mention that because it was amazing to see how community leaders just came, and active community. When I say community leaders, it's not just the leaders; it's active people. They might not be just recognized community leaders, but also the active community members, those who are really well connected with the grassroots. So I think that was one of the strengths that helped us get through that. Otherwise, it will be really difficult to reach out to all the different communities, especially having such a large area, which was the whole Southeast Queensland.
How did you and your team swing into action? Like, sort of talk us through how it unfolded when the floods, like from afar, watching the cyclone off the coast and the impacts and that kind of thing. But what was the template? How did you guys get going and realise that and was it difficult to get around and to reach some of these communities for you and the team members?
So when the floods happened, or when we heard that the cyclone was going to come, so we started talking to each other around how we can make sure we disseminate information to as many communities as possible. Now here in Queensland, we have got some very good experience from COVID. We've done some amazing work during COVID, where organizations have come together and have done a lot of consultations with community, and then designed responses that were tailored to the community's need. Very successful. So we have very strong connection. So that's when I heard about the news, that we kind of got together with our leaders and our teams and started talking about, when I say leader, I mean the organization's leaders. So I started talking about the idea so I wanted to invite all the different organizations that work with community leaders and to support in settlement area. And as I started contacting, and we did agree that that was the best approach, because we didn't want each of us to kind of approach communities separately. It was going to confuse the community. So I remember reaching out to different community organizations, and they were all on the same page. All of them were so happy to collaborate and work on it together. And in a matter of, Multicultural Australia was very active in supporting me and putting the meetings together. And it didn't take long. It just, it was, I think Tuesday, and then or a Monday, and then the next day straight away we had a meeting and called the community leaders forum within a day. that night, we usually do our forums at nighttime when community leaders are more available. That night we had over 100 community leaders attending. So it didn't take us long, because I guess it's because we put our efforts, we combined our efforts, and that made a lot of difference. So that was kind of the key to success in terms of reaching out as many community leaders as possible.
Yeah, so like you say, it's a bit like a chaotic situation, though. You had, well-worn path a little bit, as you just explained, to try and get things moving, which helps a lot, in terms of actually getting the help to people when they need it through their leaders. Where were you personally when, the bad weather rolled in, and how were you impacted? Like, you're trying to do all this, but you're living in the area that was impacted. How did it affect you personally when Alfred was sort of hovering and causing a bit of chaos?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because a lot of times we get so busy with supporting communities, we tend to forget about ourselves. So the cyclone itself did occur at nighttime here, and where I am, some suburbs were really badly impacted, and they lost power. Fortunately, we didn't lose power or weren't really negatively impacted. It was more the post-cyclone floods that affected us a little bit, but still, I guess for us it was about, okay, yes, I know that we have to listen to the messages from authorities and make sure we're safe, but at the same time, how can we make sure the communities are safe? So even though we didn't have power, and a lot of time internet was really affected, the internet connections, but we still kept going with our forums. So we didn't, because we knew that it was a preparedness that we had to first meet at that time, but then after the just okay, what happened, so what can we do together as a community to support each other? So we still continued that work. So I was, luckily wasn't that badly impacted, apart from some, just general impacts that everyone, I guess, faced in terms of shopping, no groceries, but also isolated from 3 sites, but not fully isolated from through floodwaters. So
Was it difficult for some, for other people to get to some of the forums? Like, was that challenging depending on where people were? Like, for the reasons that you'd said, like, were in some instances perhaps streets blocked and power was down. Like, was that hard for them to get where they needed to be to some of these forums and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so the forums, we held them online, because we knew that it was such a short notice. We knew that community leaders weren't able to, get to a place. And also Southeast Queensland is a really big region. So to have one location is, that's, we could actually, that could be an access issue to the forum. So it was online. Yes, it did affect us, because the second forum wasn't attended by as many people. We know that certain local government areas were really badly affected by power loss and by floods, so they weren't able to participate in the second forum and some of the other forums afterwards.
Do you think many Australians may not be aware of, some of the things that we've talked about with migrant and refugee communities that they might find especially difficult to cope with when, natural disaster strikes, like the things that we talked a little bit about earlier? In fairness, I mean, people get caught up in their own lives and dealing with this kind of thing. But, talking to you, do you think that, it's good to educate people, and that's what we hope to do through this conversation, but a lot of other Australians may not think that there are those kinds of issues that people have to deal with?
Yes, definitely. It's something that we see very regularly. Even with services, there's a lot of challenges that in terms of the way that the information is disseminated, and even the way the supports are organized. We definitely see that there's that lack of awareness. That's why we try to do a lot of post work. So, for example, in terms of language, the fact that a lot of information is translated, but it's in written form. We do have community groups and many community members who are even in their language, they're not literate. So those translated information doesn't mean much to them. So, and yes, we've definitely see that the understanding that, even in terms of when the recovery hubs opened, a lot of them were not accessing the recovery hubs because they were put in places that they trust certain places, that or either their own community leaders or places where they may have caseworkers or some point of connection. So whereas the recovery hubs initially were all like somewhere that they didn't have a connection with. So I guess there's a lot of work in that area that could happen, and that's what our collaborative is hoping to work on. But yes, that's definitely a yes to your question.
Do you think there's one positive, obviously, that you wouldn't want to go through natural disasters, but that you're helping to build that trust, like you with some members of the communities, you said, trust is an issue, and with what some of the things trauma they've gone through in, before coming to this country. But as the things like this and the efforts that you and your team put in help build that trust and like break down that mistrust of authorities a little bit. It doesn't happen overnight, I know, but does it help that gradual process, do you think?
It definitely does, and I might highlight that a lot of organizations do some work around disaster management throughout, just as a regular part of their work, and that's really helpful, because when we were doing and what they do, sorry, maybe I might just highlight that what they do during that those sessions is, or during that work is, they bring different support services, and then for example, they may bring SES, QPS, and Red Cross, and all those who are supporting, and then they connect them with the community, and community actually starts understanding what everyone's role is. So that does naturally happen a lot more in certain areas than other. So in terms of trust, yes, I think it could be a gradual process, and that's why it needs to happen more than just once when the disaster happens. It needs to be an ongoing commitment from government and organizations, and but it's possible, definitely. Can I just also acknowledge the work that everyone did and the organizations that were participating in this work? I first would like to acknowledge all the community leaders who were part of the forums, because it was because of their commitment to supporting their communities that information and all the supports reached as far and wide as possible. But I would also like to acknowledge our partners. So SSI worked with Queensland African Community Council, Queensland Community Alliance, Multicultural Australia, Queensland Program of Assistance to Survivors of Trauma, Torture and Trauma, Multicultural Communities Council of Gold Coast, Islamic Women's Association of Australia, Sunshine Coast Multicultural Network, Multicultural Affairs Queensland was a big support for us, and Multilink and Community Leaders Gathering. So there was quite a few of us that worked together to make this happen.
Yeah, it's by that roll call of organisations and people. Yeah, it certainly sounds like that there was. Thanks again, Sahba, and keep up the great work. Hopefully you won't have to swing into action in a natural disaster anytime soon, but it is Australia, so yeah, it's part of living on this continent, I think, isn't it? But it's great to be able to do that fantastic work. If any of our listeners would like more information on SSI Community Response Networks, please email info@ssi.org.au. Thanks again, Sahba, and join us again next time for the Community Advocate Podcast.